This session will cover most aspects of the grant as outlined in the RFA on EGMS. We'll start with some background on the grant before moving into information on program requirements, use of funds, eligibility criteria, award information, a checklist of critical tasks, an overview of the application and submission criteria for the grant, the review process for the applications, and some key future dates to mark on your calendar. At the end of today's session, we will have a Q&A where you can ask any remaining questions about the process you may have and get answers from the Health and Wellness team. The overall 2021 food insecurity rate for the district was 11%, which is down from 21.1% in 2020. In 2022, we anticipate this rate will nearly return to the pre-COVID rate of 10.6%. It's important to note that, despite the overall reduction in food insecurity in the district over the course of the past year, inequity in the rate still exists across population groups. Black and Latinx households and households with children continue to be at a higher risk for food insecurity than the district average. According to data collected by the Food Research and Action Center, participation in school breakfast increases student academic performance, reduces behavioral problems in and out of the classroom, and improves the overall diet of students. Though we focus on in-school impacts of breakfast participation, the benefits of school breakfast extend beyond the confines of the school day and improve the general well-being of our students. The purpose of the Breakfast Expansion Grant is to increase overall student participation in the school breakfast program through improving the nutritional content of meals and meal quality, enhancing food service environments, and reestablishing or strengthening pre-existing alternative breakfast models. More information on how to achieve these goals can be found in the digital learning session titled Increasing School Breakfast Participation, found on the OSSI website. Despite food insecurity in the district, not all eligible students are participating in or utilizing the school breakfast program. All DC students are eligible to participate in the school breakfast program for free. In the fall of 2021, the USDA awarded OSSI's Division of Health and Wellness $2 million to administer subgrants to school food authorities utilized in increasing school breakfast program participation in their schools. Funds for this grant will be available through a formula process, meaning schools identified as having priority designation, outlined later in the session, who fully complete their application will receive funding. This is not a competitive grant where applications are ranked and applicants compete for funding. To apply for the Breakfast Expansion Grant, each potential grantee must commit to a few key points. The first is implementing one or more projects that increase student participation in the school breakfast program. More information on and suggestions for implementing school breakfast program participation increasement strategies can be found in detail in the OSSI Increasing School Breakfast Program Participation learning session. This session contains a wealth of information on how to utilize the 3 previously stated strategies to encourage students to actively participate in the program. In addition, the session also covers case studies on how schools in DC put the strategies into action in a way that works best for them and their students. Participation in the learning session aims to leave you more confident in your ability to effectively implement program strategies to increase school breakfast program participation in your own schools. Grantees must also commit to submitting quarterly reports on OSSI-provided templates, as well as a final project report at the end of the grant term. Surveying students at the start and completion of the 22-23 school year to assess the effectiveness of your project is also required. This will be completed using OSSI-supplied templates as well. Additionally, OSSI will provide further opportunities to engage in successful school breakfast program participation expansion. Grantees will have the opportunity to attend a grantee kickoff meeting within the first 8 weeks of the grant award, attend virtual 1-hour quarterly school breakfast expansion community of practice meetings, and participate in a DC school breakfast event at the end of fiscal year 2023. While these aspects of the grant award process are optional, they are highly recommended to ensure that you have access to every resource available to successfully expand school breakfast program participation in your schools. These events also give you a chance to connect with your peers to better establish what interventions and strategic applications are proving most successful for specific student populations. When it comes to grant spending, funds must be utilized for specific purposes. If you wish to spend grant funds outside of the following options, please reach out to an OSSI Health and Wellness team member for clarification. Funds may be used for purchasing foods with the specific goal of improving nutritional content and meal quality, as well as purchase to conduct taste tests for new menu items. Funds cannot be used to purchase food for reimbursable meals. Funds may also be used to purchase supplies and materials and equipment with a useful life of greater than 1 year and a cost of more than $5,000. Funds can be utilized for school food service and nutrition salaries or stipends for purposes of this grant only. Funds towards salaries and stipends cannot be used to replace salaries and stipends necessary to operate child nutrition programs and associated activities. Funds are available for hiring external experts to conduct training pursuant to school meals that are aligned with USDA professional standards, registration fees for webinars or in-person training sessions, and travel expenses for staff or students related to the grant. Grant funds may not be used for food that is not used for grant purposes or does not meet the requirements of the School Breakfast Program and DC Healthy Schools Act, the purchase of food for reimbursable meals, or supplanting salaries and stipends necessary to operate child nutrition programs and associated activities outside of the scope of this grant. If you ever have a question or concern regarding how you wish to utilize or distribute grant funding, do not hesitate to reach out to the OSSI Division of Health and Wellness team with questions. We're here to guide you towards success in your goals and want to ensure that you feel confident in the choices that you're making. We will now touch on eligibility requirements for grant funding. For the initial application, the due date of April 29th, priority will be given to eligible schools in which at least 75% of students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Schools with priority designation are identified in the list of eligible schools linked on this slide and provided in the chat. Only schools that meet all eligibility requirements and this priority designation can apply in the initial round. If funds remain after priority applicants have been funded, the grant application will reopen for other eligible applicants. Each school will be individually considered and prioritization of funds will be allocated according to eligibility criteria we will detail in just a moment. Applications must be submitted by the School Food Authority for schools within the School Food Authority. Schools must plan to operate in both the 2021-22 and 22-23 school years, qualify for severe need eligibility, and either be currently participating in the school breakfast program or wanting to initiate a school breakfast program. Severe need is defined as schools where 40% or more of lunches served to students were served free or at a reduced price. More information on priority designation for eligible schools and a list of these schools can be found in the grant application through EGMS and through the link provided in the chat. Public schools and public charter schools must have completed the 21-22 school year health profile required by Section 602 of the Healthy Schools Act. We will now move on to award information for the grant itself. The grant period begins on the award date listed on the grant award notification and ends on September 30th, 2023. All funds must be expended by this date, and applicants must submit a continuation grant application to receive the second year funding. More information on continuation funding for the second year of the grant period can be found on EGMS. The total funding available for grants is $2 million. The estimated minimum award per school is $5,000. And the estimated maximum award amount per school is $20,000. The estimated number of awards to be given to schools is between 1 and 200. This grant is a formula grant. As a formula grant, if you complete and submit your application by the April 29th deadline as a priority eligible school, you will receive funds. This is not a competitive grant. Rather, it is awarded based off the meeting of clearly defined eligibility criteria. The award for schools with priority designation who submit a complete application is estimated to be between $13,422.81 and $20,000, depending on the number of eligible applicants. If funds remain after awarding all eligible applicants with priority designation, the grant application will reopen, and schools without priority designation who submit a complete application will be awarded funds based on the remaining funding available. A list of schools with priority designation can be found in the grant application on EGMS under the List of Eligible Schools tab and on the OSSI website, as well as through the link posted in the chat. OSSI has provided both in the application and on this slide, a checklist of tasks to fully complete your grant application by the April 29th deadline. At least 4 weeks prior to submission, school food authorities should have obtained a Dun Bradstreet Data Universal Numbering System number, registered the DUNS number into the System for Award Management, and registered in the OSSI Electronic Grants Management System, as well as completed the central data table for your 2022 in EGMS and accepted all program assurances. When submitting your application, ensure that the application was submitted through EGMS. All supporting documentation was uploaded, and the applicant, organization, and entity has responded to all sections of the RFA and has provided all the information within EGMS. The application had to have been submitted to the OSSI team no later than 3 p.m. on the deadline date of April 29, 2022. Applications must be submitted using the EGMS system at grants.ossi.dc.gov. No other application submission format will be accepted. There are specific application and submission criteria that must be included in your grant application. All of the information on the following slides can be found in the grant application on EGMS for further review. When applying, you will be asked to state whether your grant application is for an existing school breakfast program or a new school breakfast program. You will also be asked to describe staff roles and responsibilities for administration of the grant, including how the School Food Authority will ensure success if turnover occurs in these positions. Additionally, you will need to outline how your School Food Authority will self-monitor the project and make adjustments if needed. You will be asked during the application process to identify which strategies for increasing school breakfast program participation you will utilize in the implementation of grant funding. These strategies include improving the nutritional content and meal quality of school breakfast, enhancing school food service environments, and reestablishing or strengthening alternative breakfast serving models. This list can be found in the grant application on EGMS. Supporting documents are a required part of your grant application. These documents include 1. A list of all schools applying for the grant and an indication of priority designation if applicable, and 2. A budget including planned expenditures from the grant award through September 30th, 2023. If the application is for more than one school, the budget must specify expenditures for each school. The budget must also include all proposed purchases within the following categories of personnel, equipment, supplies and materials, indirect costs, and other. Once awarded, grantees may request to amend their budgets as long as grant funds continue to be spent on allowable items. Your EGMS budget should include planned expenditures for only year 1 of the grant. Year 2 expenditures must be included as part of required documentation. More information on how to properly outline your grant application budget can be found in the grant application on EGMS. You must outline every given budget category, even if just to say you will not be utilizing funds in that category. For example, not purchasing any equipment with grant funding. Applications will be reviewed and awarded in a 3-step process. The first step is the determination of eligibility and completeness of application. The second is priority designation, and the third is non-priority designation. After awarding schools with priority designation, if funding remains, the grant will reopen for other eligible applications to be submitted. Schools not receiving priority designation may then be awarded funding. The following funding scenarios help to outline how money will be distributed under the formula grant process. Looking at scenario 1, 100 priority designation schools applied, leaving $20,000 to be awarded to each priority eligible school, with no additional funding available for non-priority schools, so the grant in this instance was not reopened. Similarly, in scenario 2, 125 priority schools applied, leading to an equal grant amount of $16,000 per school. In scenario 3, only 75 priority eligible schools applied, each received the maximum award of $20,000, and the grant was reopened to disperse funding to non-priority applicants. In this instance, 30 non-priority schools applied and were each awarded $16,666. There are some key takeaways from this presentation we hope have been made clear. The first is that priority schools will receive funding upon submission of a complete application, up to $20,000 per school. If funding remains, schools without priority designation will be able to apply at a later date. The second is that funds must support increasing student participation in school breakfast programs. The third is that the grant is highly customizable for every school and that there's no prescribed model, so get creative and do what's best for your students. And fourth, most importantly, start your application now. There are some key future dates to note on your calendar from this presentation. The first date is today, or at least as soon as possible. Ensure you've created or obtained access to an existing EGMS account so that you can access and begin to fill out the grant application. By April 15th, 2022 by 5 p.m., please submit all questions regarding the grant to myself via email at michaela.todd@dc.gov. By April 20th, 2022, the answers to the questions that have been asked, both in the Q&A today and to me via email, will be posted in a consolidated document on the OSSI website. While we recommend you submit your grant application a week early on April 22nd, 2022, to leave extra time to manage potential technological or EGMS issues, the official grant application due date for schools with priority designation is April 29th, 2022 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If funding remains, schools without priority designation will be able to apply at a later date. The slides utilized in this session will be available for you for later review. Please freely browse any included resources as you work to apply for grant funding. We will now open the floor to questions.
Thanks, Michaela. I don't see any questions in the chat so far, but if anybody has questions, please feel free to either type them directly into the chat or raise your hand or come off mute, and we'll answer any questions that you have. Just to echo what Michaela said, as a reminder, if you don't have any questions in this moment and want to think on it, April 15th at 5:00 p.m. is the deadline for asking questions. So please submit those electronically to Michaela. But we did get a question. Is there a timeline for non-priority schools at this time?
Liz, do you want to answer that?
Sure, I'm happy to jump on, and thanks for the question, Brian. Not at this time. After we get the initial applications to determine if funding remains, we will put out a timeline that's sufficient enough for folks to either resubmit an application adding non-priority schools or submit a new application.
Can you guys review the allowable expenditures for the grant?
Yeah, of course. Are you specifically interested in one of the expenditures, or are you thinking about all of them?
Yeah, so I thought I saw a slide that said you could not use it on personnel, but then there's another slide that specified personnel, so I was a little confused about that.
That's a great question. So there's a little bit of nuance in that scenario. So you can utilize funding for school food service and nutrition salaries or stipends for the purpose of the grant exclusively, but you can't use the funds to supplant existing salaries for staff members that would already be a part of your meals program without the grant. Do you have anything else to add, Liz?
Sure, I could give an example of that. So, for example, there may be a food service worker who is already has a paid salary, you couldn't use the grant to replace their salary, but the grant could be used to pay them while they attend training specific to breakfast expansion for the training hours that they receive, or if they participate in any pilot because of this grant, they could be paid for their time accordingly there. So it can be used in those instances, just not to replace someone's salary that's already in existence and supporting the child nutrition programs.
So for schools that are already providing breakfast as part of their food program, we're a fairly new school, so I may be missing something. This is really just to kind of complement that program by providing additional nutritious meals on top of what schools are already taking advantage of.
Not necessarily to provide additional meals. If you're already serving breakfast, we'll welcome that and thank you for doing so. But to enhance the breakfast program that you are serving. And so there are a number of ways that we know students are more likely to participate in breakfast, gain access to breakfast. And so we would be happy to go into those ideas and strategies further with you. We have a training specifically on it, but it would be to expand your breakfast program.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions coming in. We'll hang on the line for a few minutes in case if anybody does. But again, as a reminder, please email all questions to Michaela directly, and answers to all questions that have been asked, even outside of this webinar today, will be posted on the FAQ document, which will be available on the OSSI website.
Yeah, thank you again for joining us today. We hope that you're leaving this information session feeling confident in your ability to successfully apply for and receive grant funding.